There are mornings in London that do not announce themselves. No gray dramatic sky, no rain hammering the cobblestones of Whitehall, no wind bending the trees along the Mall into theatrical shapes. Just an ordinary Tuesday. The kind of morning where office workers walk past horse guards parade without looking up, where pigeons own the pavement with complete confidence, and where the city moves with the particular indifference that only very old cities have mastered. It was on exactly this kind of morning that a horse named Perseus walked out of his stable for the last time as a serving ceremonial drum horse of the household cavalry. No crowds had been invited, no press had been tipped off, there was no official statement released the night before, no social media post scheduled, no carefully worded announcement from the Ministry of Defense. The regiment had kept it quiet, the way regiments tend to keep the things that matter most close, private, almost sacred. And yet something about that morning was different. The stable hands moved a little slower than usual. The officers who passed through the yard found reasons to linger. A farrier who had rishad Perseus dozens of times stood by the gate doing nothing in particular, which for a farrier is a very particular kind of doing something. Even the other horses seemed quieter, as if the yard itself understood that a chapter was ending and had decided, without being asked, to pause for it. Perseus was 23 years old. In human terms, that is the age of a young man just beginning. In the life of a ceremonial drum horse, a horse that has carried the weight of kettle drums, full military regalia, and the eyes of the entire world at some of the most significant public occasions in modern British history. 23 years is a lifetime fully, completely, and beautifully spent. Now here is the thing that most people do not know about moments like this one. Most people, when they imagine a military horse being retired, picture something heavy, something mournful, a flag being lowered, a bugle note hanging in the cold air, a soldier standing at attention with his jaw locked against emotion. And yes, some of that was present on this particular Tuesday morning in Whitehall. But most people would have the feeling entirely wrong. Because what happened on that parade ground was not a funeral. It was not a surrender. It was not even really a goodbye in the way that word usually sits in the chest like a stone. What it was, and this only becomes clear when you understand who Perseus was, and who James Whitfield was, and what 18 years of shared service actually looks like between a man and a horse. What it was a completion. And completion, when it is honest and earned, does not feel like loss. It feels like something far more rare than that. It feels like enough. To understand what Perseus meant, you have to understand what a drum horse actually is. Not in the ceremonial sense, not in the technical military definition, but in the real, physical, living sense of the role. A drum horse is not simply a large horse that carries drums. That description is accurate the way saying Westminster Abbey is simply a large building where people sometimes sit quietly, technically correct, completely insufficient. A drum horse is selected from a pool of the heaviest, most powerful, most temperamentally steady horses available. The animal must be able to carry a combined weight of well over 100 kilograms. The drums themselves, the drum banners, the full state dress of the rider's body, while marching in precise formation, holding perfect rhythm, and doing all of this in the middle of crowds that can number in the hundreds of thousands, surrounded by noise, color, movement, and the particular electric chaos of a full state occasion. The horse cannot flinch, cannot shy, cannot decide that today is not the day. More than that, the horse must do all of this while the rider controls him entirely through leg pressure alone, because both of the rider's hands are occupied playing the kettle drums throughout the march. There are no reins in a drum horse rider's hands during a state procession. The horse moves because he has been trained to respond to the subtle, almost invisible pressure of a rider's knees and heels. Which means that in the most watched, most photographed, most historically significant processions in the world, The entire weight of the performance rests on the horse understanding his job so completely that he does not need to be told. Perseus understood his job completely. He was a Shire cross, dark bay with a wide white blaze running down the center of his face that gave him a permanently slightly surprised expression, as if he had just been told something mildly interesting. He stood at 17.2 hands, which is tall even by drum horse standards, and when he was in full state dress, the gleaming kettle drums flanking his sides, the embroidered drum banners hanging to his knees, the bridle bright with polished brass, he looked less like an animal and more like a monument that had decided to walk. He was selected for the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment at the age of 4. He began his ceremonial training at 5. By 6, he had already attended his first public engagement and had, by all accounts, behaved with a dignity that put several of the human participants to shame. He was, in short, magnificent. He was also, from very early in his career, quietly and consistently mischievous, in a way that the regiment found it impossible to be properly angry about. It began with the hats. Nobody is entirely sure how Perseus developed his interest in the bearskin hats worn by the guardsmen who sometimes passed through his yard. The leading theory among the stable staff was that he found the texture interesting. The more poetic theory, favored by Corporal Whitfield and nobody else, was that Perseus considered them an inferior form of headwear and wanted them removed from the premises on aesthetic grounds. Whatever the reason, Perseus developed a habit, never aggressive, never dangerous, simply persistent, of reaching over his stable door at precisely the wrong moment and lifting a bearskin from the head of whoever happened to be passing. He did this with the casual confidence of someone performing a completely normal activity. He would hold the hat in his teeth for exactly long enough to establish ownership, then drop it, apparently satisfied. He did this 17 times over his career. It was counted. Of course it was counted. There was also the incident at the 2014 rehearsal for Trooping the Color, when Perseus, halfway through what had been a flawless dry run, stopped completely in the middle of the parade route, turned his head slowly to look at the reviewing stand, and then continued as if he had simply needed a moment to assess the situation. He had not been given any signal to stop. He had simply decided that a brief pause was appropriate. Nobody could explain it. Nobody ever did explain it. The reviewing stand had been empty at the time, which somehow made it stranger. The stable staff called it his editorial. But here is what the mischief never touched, not once in 18 years of service. His duty. When the drums were loaded, when the banners were hung, when the music started and the gates opened and London spread out before him in all its watching, waiting enormity, Perseus was perfect. Not trained perfect, not obedient perfect, something better than that. He was present perfect, completely, utterly, wholly there. And the man who knew this better than anyone was Corporal James Whitfield. James Whitfield joined the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment at 21, which is young, and was assigned to Perseus at 24, which was, by the accounts of everyone involved, either very good luck or very good judgment by whoever made the decision, depending on who you asked. Whitfield was not the most decorated soldier in the regiment. He was not the loudest voice in the barracks or the most naturally commanding presence on the parade ground. What he was, and this is the thing that the people who worked alongside him came back to again and again when they talked about him, was quiet in exactly the right way. There is a kind of quiet that is absence, a person not filling space, and then there is a different kind of quiet, rarer and more useful, that is presence without noise. The kind of quiet that horses understand better than humans do, because horses have been reading the quality of human stillness for 10,000 years, and they know the difference between the two immediately. Perseus knew the difference immediately. The pairing was noticed within weeks, not celebrated, not formally acknowledged. The regiment is not an institution that makes a ceremony of feelings, but noticed. The way the other stable hands gave Whitfield and Perseus slightly more room when they worked together. The way senior NCOs stopped walking through that particular corner of the stable yard at certain hours. Small, wordless accommodations that institutions make when something real is happening, and they have the wisdom not to interfere with it. Whitfield rode Perseus at 41 state and ceremonial occasions over their years together. He was on Perseus's back for 2 state openings of Parliament, for the Trooping the Color 5 times, for a state funeral, for a royal wedding. He was the rider whose hands were on the drums while his knees spoke to the horse below him, on days when the whole country was watching and every step mattered. He cleaned Perseus's tack himself on the evenings before major engagements, even when it was not required, even when other hands were available. He knew Perseus's preferences, the exact spot below the left ear that needed scratching, the particular rhythm of grooming strokes that settled the horse before sleep, the way Perseus's breathing changed when he was content versus when he was merely tolerating a situation. Whitfield knew all of it without having to think about it, the way you know the layout of a house you have lived in for years in the dark. And Perseus, for his part, did something with Whitfield that he did with no one else in the regiment. He was still. Not the trained stillness of a horse that has learned to stand on command. A different kind of stillness, chosen stillness, the particular quiet of a large, powerful animal that has decided, not been taught, decided, that this specific human is worth being calm for. The regiment saw it. The regiment said nothing about it because saying something would have been the wrong kind of acknowledgement, but they saw it. And then the morning came when what they had all seen, and quietly celebrated and carefully protected, began its ending. It was not a dramatic moment. That is the first thing to understand about it. Nobody who was present would tell you later that they knew immediately. There was no single, clear, terrible instant where everything shifted. It was slower than that, and in some ways slower things are harder, because they do not give you the clean, sharp shock of a sudden event. They give you instead a series of small observations that accumulate quietly in the back of your mind until the morning you wake up and realize they have been building towards something you did not want to name. Perseus had been moving differently for several months before anyone said anything out loud. Not lame, not injured, nothing that the veterinary examinations, which were thorough and regular, as they are for all household cavalry horses, flagged as a clinical finding requiring immediate action. It was more subtle than that. A slight hesitation in the left hindquarter when moving off from a standing start. A change in the way he carried his head on longer distances, not painful exactly, but different. The particular tiredness that appears in the eyes of old athletes, not defeat, not suffering, something more like the look of a body that has given everything it had to give and knows it. Whitfield noticed first. Of course he noticed first. He mentioned it to the veterinary officer in the careful, precise way of someone who has thought very seriously about exactly what they want to say before they say it. Not alarmed, not emotional, just specific. These observations in this sequence over this period of time. The vet listened, nodded, examined, and came back the following week with findings that confirmed what Whitfield had already understood but had not yet allowed himself to fully think. Perseus was not ill. Perseus was not in acute distress. Perseus was old in the way that large horses go old, not suddenly but honestly. The joints that had carried extraordinary weight for extraordinary distances over 2 decades making the ordinary mathematics of time visible at last. He could still walk. He could still trot. He could still, on good days, move with something close to his old grandeur. But the kettle drums were heavy. The ceremonial duties were demanding. The distances were long and the surfaces were hard, and the question that the veterinary officer put to Whitfield, not as a finding but as a question, carefully and respectfully, was whether what they were asking of Perseus was still fair. Whitfield sat with that question for 2 days. He did not discuss it with colleagues, did not seek opinions, did not process it loudly. He sat with it the way he sat with most things, quietly, completely, in the company of the answer he already knew but was taking the time to accept properly. On the third day, he went to the commanding officer and said that he believed Perseus had earned his retirement. The word earned was noted by everyone in that room. Not needs, not requires, not should have, must have is being granted, earned. As if retirement was not a concession to age but a reward for service, which, when you say it that way, is exactly what it is. The paperwork was filed. The date was set. The regiment was informed quietly, in the manner of people who understand that some things do not need to be announced to be significant. And then a Tuesday morning arrived in Whitehall that did not announce itself, and Perseus walked out of his stable one last time as a serving drum horse, and the stable hands moved slowly, and a farrier stood at the gate doing nothing in particular. And Corporal James Whitfield stood at the entrance to the yard, in his stable dress rather than his ceremonial uniform, and waited for his horse. There is a tradition in the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment that most people outside the regiment do not know about, because it is not the kind of tradition that is written into official ceremonial handbooks or described on heritage websites. It is the kind of tradition that exists because people who spend their lives in service to something larger than themselves eventually develop, without discussing it, a shared understanding of what moments deserve marking and how to mark them. When a horse retires from the regiment, particularly a horse who has served at the highest level, at the most significant occasions, for the longest time, the regiment says goodbye in its own way. On the morning of Perseus's last day, the horses in the stables adjacent to his were brought to their stable doors. The yard, normally busy with the efficient movement of a working military establishment, was cleared of non-essential activity. The musicians of the mounted band, because of course there are musicians, because there are always musicians, were present, not in full dress, not with their full complement of instruments, but present. A small number of them. Enough. Whitfield led Perseus out into the yard himself. Perseus, for his part, walked out with the complete dignity of a horse who had spent 18 years understanding the weight of occasions. He did not need to be told this one was significant. His ears moved forward. His head came up. That wide white blaze on his face caught the thin morning light, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked less like an old horse at the end of his service and more like what he had always been. A monument that had decided to walk. The musicians played, not a march, something slower, something that the regiment chose for exactly this morning, and the specific piece they chose is not important for this story because what was important was not the music itself but what Perseus did when he heard it. He stopped walking. Whitfield felt it in the lead rope, not a resistance, not a refusal, just a choosing. Perseus stood still in the middle of the yard, the music moving around him, the horses at their stable doors watching, and he was completely, entirely, perfectly still. Not trained stillness. Chosen stillness. The same stillness he had given Whitfield for 18 years, offered now to the whole yard, to the whole regiment, to the whole weight of what the morning was. He stood there for the full length of the piece, and his breathing was slow, and his eyes were quiet, and there was nothing in his expression, if you know how to read a horse's expression, and Whitfield absolutely knew how to read this horse's expression. There was nothing in it that looked like sadness. What was there was something harder to name and more valuable. It looked like satisfaction. And here is the twist that changes the entire shape of the morning. The detail that inverts what you think you are watching when you imagine a military horse being retired. Perseus had always been the one giving. For 18 years the giving had run in one direction from him outward, toward the regiment, toward the occasions, toward the duty. He gave his strength, his steadiness, his trained and chosen obedience, his presence, his perfection on the days when perfection was required. And what the stillness in the yard said, what a horse cannot say in words but said completely in that moment, was that he knew it. He knew what he had given. He knew the shape of his service and it fit him well, and the standing in the yard while the music played was not him receiving a farewell. It was him acknowledging, in the only language available to him, that the giving had been worth it. That is not loss. That is completion. Whitfield understood it immediately. Several of the stable hands had to look at other parts of the yard for a while. The farrier at the gate made a sound that he later claimed was caused by something in his throat entirely unrelated to the occasion. Nobody believed him. Nobody said so. When the music ended, Perseus walked forward again. Whitfield walked beside him, and they left the yard together, not for the last time as it turned out, but for the last time as horse and rider in service to the crown. The paperwork for the adoption was already prepared before the retirement ceremony. This was not because Whitfield had assumed the outcome. It was because he had decided it, privately and completely, sometime before anyone else knew it was a decision being made. The same way he had decided, 2 days after the veterinary question, that Perseus had earned his retirement. Whitfield made decisions the way he did most things, quietly, fully, and without needing anyone else to arrive at the same place before he moved. He had a property in Wiltshire, a small place, nothing remarkable, the kind of quietly respectable rural property that fits a quietly respectable rural life. He had, over the preceding 18 months, made certain modifications to it. A stable that was adequate became a stable that was very good. Fencing that was serviceable became fencing that was excellent. A paddock that existed became a paddock that was genuinely suitable for a large, heavy horse with aging joints who needed good footing, good grass, and the kind of unhurried space that 23 years of ceremonial service had been preparing him to deserve. Whitfield did not make a public announcement about the adoption. He did not post about it. He did not give interviews or accept the several offers that came. Once word moved quietly through certain circles, from journalists who thought it was a lovely human interest story. He simply went and collected his horse. Perseus arrived in Wiltshire on a morning that was, again, entirely ordinary. No drama, no ceremony, nothing that marked it as a significant occasion to anyone driving past on the road. A horse box pulling into a small property. A man waiting at the gate in civilian clothes. A horse walking down the ramp with the measured, deliberate steps of a large old animal who has decided that this particular surface is acceptable. And then Perseus walked into his paddock and stopped and looked at the space around him, the open grass, the quiet. The absence of crowds and drums and cobblestones and watching eyes, and did what horses do when they find themselves somewhere new and safe. He dropped his head and began to graze. Just that, just a horse eating grass in a field, the most ordinary thing in the world. Whitfield stood at the fence for a long time watching him do it, and the expression on his face was one that people who knew Whitfield recognized as the closest he got to visible joy. Not wide, not showy, just present, just real. The regiment, for their part, had given Perseus a formal farewell from the records. His service history, 41 state engagements, 18 years, 2 drum riders in his career of which Whitfield was the second and longest serving, was logged in the regimental archive in the way that the service records of exceptional soldiers are logged, with specificity and with the particular care that institutions give to records they intend to keep. A small framed photograph was placed in the stable from which Perseus had retired. Not announced, not labeled, just placed. The photograph showed Perseus in full state dress at the 2019 Trooping the Color, kettle drums gleaming, banners hanging perfectly, head up, blaze catching the light. Beside him in the frame, barely visible at the lower left corner because the photograph had been composed to center on the horse, was Whitfield's left hand resting on the drum. Just that, just a hand. But everyone in the regiment knew whose hand it was and what it meant that it was there. The stable hands passed that photograph every day. Some of them stopped in front of it sometimes. Some of them did not. Both responses were correct. Now here is the question that the story of Perseus and James Whitfield quietly asks, not loudly, not insistently, but persistently, the way the best questions do. What do we owe the ones who serve in silence? Not the ones who receive the recognition, not the ones whose names are in the programs and whose faces are in the photographs, and whose contributions are publicly acknowledged in the careful language of official gratitude. The ones in the programs are important too, and their recognition is deserved. But that is not the question Perseus asks. Perseus asks about the ones who are present at every significant moment, who make every significant moment possible, who carry the weight, literally, in his case, of the things we consider worth celebrating and preserving, and who do all of this without being able to say a word about it. The household cavalry has hundreds of horses. Most people who watch the great state occasions of British public life know the regiment, know the uniform, know the spectacle. Very few of them know the names of the horses. Very few of them think to ask. And the horses, being horses, do not point this out. But the question remains, and it is not a small one. In every institution, in every tradition, in every system that produces the things we call culture and ceremony and history, there are the Perseus figures, the ones who do not receive the citation or the promotion or the public acknowledgement, the ones whose contribution is so woven into the fabric of the thing that it becomes invisible, not because it is small, but because it is essential. Essential things, when they work perfectly, tend to become invisible. That is the nature of the essential. What the story of Perseus's retirement says, what Whitfield's decision to bring him to Wiltshire says, what the photograph in the stable says, what the farrier at the gate on that quiet Tuesday morning says, is that invisibility is not the same as unnoticed. The ones who pay attention, pay attention. The ones who understand what they are watching, watch properly. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, and those times matter enormously. The people beside the essential figures make a private, unglamorous, completely sincere decision to honor what deserves honoring. Whitfield did not adopt Perseus because it was the right thing to do in the public sense. He did not do it to make a point or to be seen making a point. He did it because 18 years of shared service had created in him an obligation that he took seriously and intended to meet, and meeting it felt less like generosity and more like simple arithmetic. Perseus had given, Whitfield would give back. That was the whole of it. And in that simplicity, there is something that the elaborate public ceremonies of gratitude, the speeches, the plaques, the formal acknowledgments, sometimes fail to achieve. Not because those things are meaningless. They are not meaningless. But there is a kind of honoring that only works when it is private, when it asks nothing in return, when it is given in a stable yard on an ordinary morning with no audience except a few horses and a farrier who definitely had something in his throat. That kind of honoring does not make the news. It does not go viral. It does not accumulate the thousands of comments from people saying that this is exactly what they needed to see today, though perhaps it is exactly what they needed to see today. It simply happens, and the one it is meant for receives it completely and without confusion. Perseus received it completely. He knew what the stillness in the yard was. He knew what the music was for. He knew what the man walking beside him through the gate had decided, and what that decision had cost, and what it meant. Horses know more about the quality of human intention than humans generally give them credit for knowing. Perseus, who had spent 18 years reading the pressure of a man's knees in the middle of the most watched moments in the British calendar, was not going to miss the quality of a man standing at a fence in Wiltshire, watching him eat grass. He was not going to miss it at all. So let me ask you this, and I mean it genuinely, not as a formality. Think of the Perseus figures in your own life. The ones whose service is so consistent, so woven in, so quietly essential that it has become part of the background of your days. The ones who carry weight you may not have fully measured. The ones who show up and keep showing up and do not make a speech about the showing up. Have you stood at the fence lately? Have you been the farrier at the gate, not doing anything in particular, which is its own form of acknowledgement. Have you prepared the paddock, even before you announced you were going to? Perseus is in Wiltshire now. He eats grass in the mornings when the light comes across the field in a particular way that makes the dew visible on every blade. He moves slowly, but he moves without pain. His joints carry only his own weight now, which is considerable but fair. The white blaze on his face still gives him his permanently mildly surprised expression, as if something interesting was just mentioned, as if the world around him continues to offer things worth noticing. He has not stolen a single bearskin hat since his retirement. This is either because there are no bearskin hats available in rural Wiltshire, or because that particular editorial chapter of his career is complete. Whitfield believes it is the latter. He believes Perseus has made his assessment of the situation and found it, finally, satisfactory. Whitfield is probably right. He usually was. And somewhere in the regimental stables at Knightsbridge Barracks, on a wall beside a stable door, a photograph shows a drum horse in full state dress with a man's hand barely visible in the lower left corner. And the horses who live in those stables walk past it every day. And the stable hands who work there walk past it every day. And occasionally someone stops. And the ones who stop know exactly what they are stopping for. Not for the drums, not for the uniform, not for the grandeur of the occasion captured in the frame. For the hand, for what the hand meant, for the 18 years of quiet, chosen, irreplaceable presence that the hand represents. That is what Perseus felt on the day he was retired. Not loss, not ending. The honest, complete, deeply satisfying weight of a thing fully given and fully received. That is enough. That is more than enough. That, in the end, is everything.